So here I am in Beijing, China, still on my research tour for Beyond the Gates of Kunlun. It's a hot summer night here at the end of July. Big city, big energy. A lot of fun, different from the last video I filmed, which was on Qingcheng Shan in southwestern China. Hopefully the audio is a little better for this one. You know, what I love about building a role-playing game, a tabletop role-playing game, is the creative space you drop into, thinking about how do I get all this cool stuff into the game? How do I, figure out the mechanics and the systems in the game that will pull players into immersion in the fantasy of the game, right? So fantasy China it's got its own thing happening. And one of my styles with playing is I don't like generic stuff. It's got to be deep. And so what I'm not going to do is give a generic sort of general overview of some fantasized China. I want to peg it down into a certain time and places, not just one place, but different places, right? So if I'm in Beijing here, it's very different from where I was a few weeks ago in Qingcheng Shan in Sichuan province. The culture is different, the smells are different, the food is different, the language is different. Beijing is a flat plain. There's some mountains around, yes, Great Wall, but it's a different vibe. Sichuan was known as the Shu Kingdom a few thousand years ago in the Han Dynasty, and previous to that. And so it has sort of its own cultural, historical thing. And one of the things I want to do in the game is pull all that stuff in. And so I will be centering it on one geographic region at one time in history. It's a fantasy version, yes, so I'm going to play with it. I'm going to add stuff in. I'm going to play with timelines and geography. I haven't quite figured all that out yet. But I want it rich and full of real stuff and have that fantasy, anything can happen. And if you're running this at your table, you don't have to have a PhD in Chinese history to feel competent, right? You can make up your own stuff. One of the things I really liked was Warhammer, right? The Warhammer world. So they took basically, it's a version of Europe at a certain time and place, but then they messed with it and they made it their own. And I think I kind of like that feel, right? It's different from the Tolkien approach where you have Middle Earth, which is just its own totally whole separate thing, and it's more grounded in history with the Warhammer world. Don't get me wrong, I love Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is, it's got to be one of my favorite settings of all time. But for me, with China especially, to do a game about, in East Asia, you got to bring in some history stuff. It's just so much a part of the culture. There's such rich history here, and I think doing a fully fantasy version of it, and there are full fantasy versions done by Chinese people, more in xianxia genre, right? So the immortal cultivator genres. And it can work for sure, but it's just not my style. I mean, I went to university for 8 years, grad school, studying Asian studies, studying Chinese history, literature, language, philosophy, religion, a lot of religion, Daoist studies, Buddhism. And I really enjoyed it. And it's in my, it's in my head. And then I lived here for several years in China. And so it's all this stuff that I just love and want to put into the game. And so for me, the trick is figuring out how to do it in a way that works, that's still fun. It's still got to be a fun game. I don't want it to be super dry. I don't want to feel like you're in a museum. I want it to be a living, breathing piece of a setting, right, that you're immersed in and that you feel a part of and you feel like you can contribute to without breaking anything. So I've been really inspired on this trip about how to do that. So I've been building this game for about 5 years, playing it, and I realized by just coming here and soaking it in, I'm just so inspired. Inspired to create the various methods that characters can learn in the game, what kind of characters you can play. And I'm kind of going old school with it, right? So and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to be that more modern games are more focused. They're more specific. They want to do one thing really well. And I come from an older style of gameplay where you kind of want to do lots of different stuff in the world. I mean, I went through the 80s and 90s playing AD&D, D&D, and man, like the 90s, second edition AD&D was being played, and there were so many different settings. It was, I think they actually did too many. I'm quite happy with just the original 3, Greyhawk, Dragonlance, Forgotten Realms. I'm happy with that. And then, of course, your basic D&D world as well, which was fantastic. But my point is, being able to have a game setting and a system. I guess those are different settings, and I'm just doing one setting. But my point is, I want you to be able to feel like you can do different kinds of adventures in the setting. So you don't have to do all one. But we still want to keep flavor, right? We still want to have, and so that's the trick, is how deep do you go and how broad, right? So broad is you could do all sorts of different things in that setting. But if you go too broad, then it's boring and generic, because you can do everything, right? Whereas if you go deeper, or you have systems and mechanics in the game that deal with specific stuff, such as, for me, cultivation. Like I have this mechanic in the game that deals with basically enlightenment, but it's done I think in a very fun way. It's not dogmatic. It's like you can play around with it as a character if you want, but you can also just ignore it. If you want to be like a charlatan, dude going around cheating people out of whatever, go for it. It's there for you. And so that's the trick I've found with building this system and the setting, is finding that balance. And so what I do is I generally I balance. I like two extremes and then have them both, but a little bit of one and the other. So it has this idea of the yin yang symbol in Chinese culture, right? So it's always kind of going the two fish, right? Going one into the other, as opposed to just bringing everything to a middle and it's flat. Have the two extremes. So for example, I love the bustle of a Chinese city, and that's very Chinese. The Chinese love it too. They call it 热闹. It's just, they don't really want quiet. They want to be in a big, busy restaurant with their friends, having fun. And I wanted that kind of the cacophony and energy of a dim sum restaurant at the table in the setting. At the same time, you have this very austere Chinese paintings with the mist and the mountains, and the idea of the liu bai, where you leave a little white, so you have some civilization off in a corner, maybe a couple buildings and stuff, and then you have this mountain with waterfalls and all the mist, and then it just kind of goes off into the white of the background, and it's very calm and clean and the opposite of the bustle of the marketplace. And so I like playing with those kind of dichotomies. The dichotomy? Yeah, the two spectrums, the two poles. Playing with those back and forth. And you can find them so much, especially in Chinese culture. And so I'm putting that in the game and then figuring out how to make them work in the game. It's been fun. This week, while I'm traveling, I spend hours a day writing the game. So I get inspired and I just write it. And I rewrote the class progression system. So I had one before. Now I'm tuning it. It's interesting. What I had before, my first kind of pass on it was good. I like it anyways. And it's just figuring out fine-tuning it, bringing more into it, seeing an idea. So the idea of foundation, right? So if you're a character in the setting, something that Chinese culture really leans into is this idea that you don't get powerful for nothing. You need to work at it. If you want to build power and skills and build something for yourself, you need to work hard and figure out how to make it happen. And so the idea, so some of the very famous heroes in Chinese fiction, especially wuxia fiction, the martial arts fictions, you train and you have to find masters who have secret methods, and then you work really hard to try and figure out how to make it happen. And that's a part of the game. And so I'm putting that in the game. So the progression system is based around this idea of training and practice. So for one thing, it's not all fair. I like asymmetry in game design. Balance, that's a huge discussion. We talk about balance, maybe another video. There's different ways that games can be balanced. And I'm okay with a little imbalance, right? I'm okay with China also talks about fate and destiny and the role of the dice. But anyways, back to what I was talking about, progression. So to gain power, you need to find methods and you need to train them. You need to find someone who's going to teach them to you, and that could be a master on a far-off monastery, or even a secret scroll that you found, hidden in your uncle's attic, right? You then have that method. You can then train it, and there's rules for that. We have systems for that. And a lot of those methods that you learn, so methods are basically skills, but some of them are pretty neat, pretty powerful. So you can almost think of them as sort of like that skill, the spell list you have in AD&D Player's Handbook. The last half of the book is all just spells, right? And so a lot of these methods are like that. But you need to have a foundation to learn some of that stuff. So there's these based on prerequisites, this idea of prerequisites. So you have to have learned a certain amount, and a foundation takes 3 years to learn. And most characters will have a foundation coming into the game already, so that's where they start. It's based on who their master is and the lineage and the gate that they've walked through. So you have these different gates that you choose, kind of like character classes, but much less. What they give is much less. It's a fantasy of a kind of character you can play. So one of the gates would be the gate of cultivation, the gate of martial arts, the gate of medicine, the gate of sorcery. There's a lot of other gates, and so you get a foundation or two, and there's different kinds of foundations, and they're connected to the gates. And then you have a master, and you roll for your master in the game when you're character creation. So you're creating your own character, but there's a character within a character, and that's your master, your lineage, and the lineage that you come from. And different lineages will bring different things with them. For example, you could have a feud with another lineage, and you inherit that, and you got to deal with that. Or your master might be a drunk, and you got to deal with that. So just with in Chinese society, the social dynamics are so important. It's sort of the Western ideal of the hero's journey. You're solo, you go off, do some stuff, and come back and you're a hero. It's cool, nothing wrong with that. But in finding Chinese culture, a lot of the fiction, the way it builds, is through these social dynamics that you have to negotiate and navigate. You got to figure it out. It's like, okay, I have this issue. My teacher's like this, and my Shixiong is like my older disciple brother. I gotta, and there's stuff going on there, and I'm in the middle of it. I gotta figure it out, and it's frustrating, and I'm not sure how to do it, but that's where some of the fun in the game comes from. So characters, when they start the game, you'll have a web of relationships that you're built into right away. So you're not just a solo character, an individual character. You are also a product of the relationships around you. That's a part of who you are. And that game, and part of the game is the GM will weave that into the game. Not during the adventure, maybe. So we have 2 phases of play. There's yin and yang phase. So the yang phase is your phase, your active phase, where you're off adventuring at the tabletop, doing stuff. And you go on an adventure, maybe raid a tomb, get into some political intrigue, maybe some horror in the monastery, demon hunting stuff, have fun, usual fun stuff. But then you at some point you'll switch into what's called a yin phase, and that's basically between adventures. Just think of it as downtime between adventures. And I think recently, in the last, say, 10 years or so, I think games have been playing around with this, and I actually really love it. Back in the day, we would have our own versions of it, and the GM would just figure it out. But now we're actually doing these game mechanics for downtime, and I love it. So I'm leaning into that. So the yin phase is the downtime. And that's when some of these relationships in your life might come up, and you have to deal with that. It's also a great time to go and train specifically. So you spend like a couple months and just train. You might also have to go home for the Chinese Lunar New Year and do some ancestor worship to keep the ancestors happy and make sure you don't get any bad fortune in the year ahead. So I'm finding these ways mechanically and through systems in the game to pull people into the Chinese worldview and that immersion into this other world, which is one of the reasons I game. Like, I love immersion. It's a big part of why I play these games. I'm into this. I love escapism. I'm totally down for it. I don't think escapism is a bad thing. So I don't like meta stuff too much in games where it kind of, it's a little too witty for me. I like to keep things grounded and sincere and kind of really in the world. Which is another thing I'm really having fun with, is designing the core rulebook, is figuring out how to write it in a way that pulls you into the world. So it's like an artifact from the world that you've discovered. And so there's been some really fun kind of literary ways I've been able to do that, the way I write. So the rules talk to you as if you're a person in the world. And I got the idea from Mordheim. Mordheim is a game that I love. It's a tabletop skirmish game by Games Workshop. John Blanche, my favorite artistic vision ever. R.I.P. He passed away, 6 weeks ago as I filmed this. Wow. John Blanche changed my world, like he, in our group, the group I played with, his vision of what fantasy could be, a game, he just brought things to a whole other level, which I love it to this day. And I want to bring some of that into my game. What was I talking about? I have no idea. Anyways, I'm having so much fun building this. I forgot. I had a thread there. Yeah, it's totally gone. Mordheim, yeah, artifact from the world, right? And so if you pick up that rule book, it feels like it's written. It's like it's an artifact from that world. It's a book that you found in the world. It talks to you like you're in the world. The art direction for that book is just incredible. The illustrations in that, it's just dripping with atmosphere. I love it. I love it. And so I've been figuring out ways of doing that. So one of the things I came up with was having a commentator. So often in China you'd have texts. There's many books in China. By the year 1900, they had more books than the rest of the world combined published. So highly literate culture, especially over the later imperial period. And so one of the things they would do is you'd have a book, and then you'd have another person would write commentary in the book. So they'd write their own, thoughts and ideas and analysis in the columns between the other characters and stuff. It might be in a different colored ink sometimes or whatnot. So I'm doing a commentator for this book, and it is a man. It's actually, I've built a whole personality for him, and he's a secret character, and I'm not going to talk more about that than that, but there's different levels to his personality and the way he comments on the world and things in the world. So you're reading the book, you might read something about, say, renown, right? So renown is a mechanism, or better one is connections, guanxi. So every character has a guanxi rating, their connections in the world. And he might have a comment about guanxi and kind of, it might be funny, it might be interesting, but it grounds it in the world. And he has this really interesting voice that I've come up with for him. So yeah, having fun with that. Yeah, I'm really inspired, and I really want to. I'm really inspired with the project and where it's going. I feel like it's just kind of flowing through me. It's not even really mine, and I can't wait to get it to everyone. To share it with the world and start playing it more. So after this trip, I've written almost 50. I've written a lot. I want to say like 50,000 words, hours a day. There's a lot more there now, and I want to keep going with it. Yeah, so anyways, I'm going to, maybe I'll film some more of these China videos as I have ideas about the experience of making this game, what it's meant for me and whatnot. And then when I get back to Canada, my plan is to hit, I have a studio at home where I filmed video for my other YouTube channel, which is for my teaching. I teach Daoist internal alchemy. And so I'll start doing something a little more professional as opposed to the shaky iPhone shot here. I'll do some more professional videos and really get into what the game's about, different, the rules. I'll introduce it all to you. Also do more videos about myself and maybe some of the other friends who have been involved with this process here at Dragon Gate Studio. And of course the AI game, which is a whole other thing. And yeah, that's a whole other thing. We'll talk about that more, of course. One game, two experiences. One game, two experiences. Okay, talk to you later, guys.